has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The death of Her Majesty brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 8 decades of immense change. Throughout that time, Her Majesty was the one constant presence in public life, a head of state who personified stability and reassurance. Her life had been dedicated to the service of the people, and her reign was characterised by a steadfast sense of duty. Elizabeth was just 25 when she came to the throne in 1952 on the sudden death of her father, King George VI, as Britain was still recovering from the Second World War. She was sustained by her 73-year marriage to the late Prince Philip, her strength and stay, as she once described him, who was at her side for 3 major Jubilee celebrations. Elizabeth II was the most widely travelled head of state in history, the Queen of 15 nations, head of the Commonwealth of 54 countries and territories. Her Majesty's death brings the second Elizabethan age to a close and a long and momentous chapter in British life, a reign marked above all else by a sense of service to others, a reign unlike any other in the long history of Britain and the Commonwealth. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is with me as we report the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And one thinks immediately, Nick, first of all, of the loss for the royal family.
One does. This, for the nation, for them, this is an absolutely massive moment. The moment that so many people have dreaded for so long has come. It's a moment of great solemnity and national sadness. It's hard, really, fully to take it in. It's no great surprise, given her age and her declining health. But nonetheless, it is a very considerable shock to feel that she has died. Millions of people, I think, as they learn this news, will feel a sense of personal loss. And I think many people will find it rather disorientating. Let's just understand this moment. It isn't just the death of the longest lived, longest reigning monarch in British history, a monarch who has been there in the background to our lives for most of us, for all of our lives. It is the end of what I think history will judge to have been one of the most remarkable reigns in the 1,000+ year years of the British monarchy, a reign which will be remembered and talked about in years to come. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and we know, as we've said this afternoon, that not everyone is, she was a monarch who earned the widest possible respect here in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It's the end of the reign of Elizabeth II, a monarch who always put duty first, who brought dignity and decency to the highest office in the land, who embodied the best of qualities, who's been a focus for national unity and identity, and who has been the still, calm centre of stability and reassurance to this nation and the other nations of which she has been head of state for more than 70 years, while so much around her has changed. She has been a distillation of our national identity. She has been constant in an ever-shifting world, constant, steadfast, dependable, dutiful. These are all rather old-fashioned words, old-fashioned concepts even, but I think that they sum up what she brought to the role of monarch. We recall the pledge she made on her 21st birthday. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Well, she truly remained true to that pledge. It was a life of finely judged service, true to the principles of constitutional monarchy, driven by duty, sustained by faith. And we recall also the message that she issued when she reached her 70th birthday in February of this year. You remember the message that was issued? She wrote, "I remain eternally grateful for and humbled by the loyalty and affection that you continue to give me." She said, "I look forward to continuing to serve you with all of my heart." And she signed that message, "Your servant, Elizabeth R." Well, that servant has gone. The end of the reign of Elizabeth II, Elizabeth the Great, as many people will regard her. That reign has ended. And we have a new king.
Yes.
The crown passes invisibly, but immediately, imperceptibly. Charles is now our king and our head of state. Camilla is now Queen Consort. It remains to be seen what name he will take, but we will refer to him as the king, and he will lead the nation's mourning for his mother. As you say, she came to the throne just a few years after the end of the Second World War. She succeeded to the throne in 1952 after the death of her father. And on the night of her coronation, in a broadcast on the BBC, she said, "Throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your service." And as that message, and as the message she issued on the 70th anniversary of her accession showed, if there is one word that I think is the key to the success of her reign, I would suggest it's not actually duty, the word which is normally associated with her, it's humility. Because for all of the grandness of her position, here is the coronation, the imperial state crown being lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. For all the grandness of her position, it never went to her head. She had, I think, an instinctive understanding that as a hereditary monarch, she had to win the trust of the people of this country and the other countries of which she was queen. And that, I believe, is what she did. She gained it and she kept it. She kept the monarchy strong. Now, of course, there have been a few bumps along the way. It would be extraordinary if there hadn't been. Bumps which have almost without exception been caused by other members of her family. But she pursued her role with that sense of humility and by putting duty first. And she was at heart, people who knew her, it's funny to talk in the past tense now,
Yes.
isn't it? She was a very down-to-earth, a straightforward and unpretentious woman, rather reserved, certainly in her early years. There was none of that sort of vainglorious and overbearing behaviour that we've sometimes perhaps seen with other members of her family. For 70 years, she's been the constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives, the head of the nation, as she's sometimes been referred to, above politics, but with a shrewd interest in and a grasp of politics and of political figures. So we now look back on, and there will be so many tributes now, as people take this in, as they come to terms with their own emotions. And I'm quite sure there will be many people who are very emotional at this moment, as they learn of this news, the death of the Queen. But this nation and so many other nations will now pay tribute to this long life of service which has now ended.
Symbolised everywhere, Nick. The flags are being lowered, and the rainbow along with the lowered flag at Windsor, the favourite home of the Queen, so many years. Flags lowered already at Buckingham Palace. And so many elements, Nick, of your appreciation and tribute will be echoed by political leaders at Downing Street. We're expecting Liz Truss to say something fairly soon. The Prime Minister will offer her own sympathy to the royal family, and she will of course have her own words of appreciation for the long service of Her Majesty. And there'll be other political leaders too wanting to pay tribute to a lifetime of service, a lifetime of humble commitment to duty, as Nick was saying, and of taking the role as seriously as it's possible to take it. Very much in line with the teaching that her father had shared with her all those years ago in Buckingham Palace. King George VI, very proud of his two daughters, and took a long time to offer the experience and learning to his elder daughter Elizabeth. And there you have at the railings of Buckingham Palace, they are in line with tradition posting the formal notice, and that notice will say that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died peacefully today at Balmoral in Scotland, the age of 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history. A lifetime of service to people in the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and in many parts of the world. An example of leadership which didn't stray into the realm of politics, and for lots of people the ideal symbol of what a constitutional monarchy should be like. Well, now the world has been told, and the official notice has been posted as the palace staff make their way back into what was the Queen's home. It is now the home of the King and the Queen Consort, because Prince Charles is now
Muy buenas tardes a las personas que nos están viendo a través de Planeta Televisión. Hace unos minutos se dio a conocer a través de los medios de comunicación oficiales del Reino Unido que murió la reina Isabel II a los 96 años de edad. Estamos viendo estas imágenes en vivo. Este es el Palacio de Buckingham, ahí en el Reino Unido. Estamos sumándonos a la transmisión de la BBC, la cual interrumpió todos sus espacios para dar cabida a esta noticia. Desde hace unos minutos se veían indicios de que iban a realizar el protocolo de fallecimiento de un miembro de la familia real. Estamos viendo a la derecha la imagen de Reuters, a la izquierda la imagen de la BBC, a la derecha estamos viendo muchísima gente. Es una toma muy cercana a las puertas del Palacio de Buckingham. Del lado izquierdo igual es otra panorámica desde el helicóptero. Son imágenes que nos están llegando de gente que se reunió allí a razón del fallecimiento de la reina Isabel II, que recordemos hoy, buen horario de acá de América. Hoy más temprano se había informado que la monarca estaba atravesando un delicado estado de salud e incluso sus hijos se habían reunido con ella hace unas horas. Habrían cancelado todos sus eventos en agenda, incluso el príncipe Harry, Meghan. Parece que ellos, los médicos ya les habían dicho que algo andaba mal. Los doctores fueron los que dieron el parte médico que estaba delicada. El presidente Biden incluso deseó su propia recuperación. Desafortunadamente, nos venimos enterando hace unos minutos que murió la reina Isabel II, que es una monarca longeva, es 70 años en el poder. Imagínate todo lo que no puedes ver, todo lo que puedes ver en 70 años. Es una peculiaridad por la cual la reina Isabel es una figura muy querida y muy popular allá en el Reino Unido. 70 años, es decir, le tocó la guerra mundial, la Guerra Fría, sumamente un personaje que sin duda puede trascender a la historia, sí, trascendió a la historia. La gente allá en el Reino Unido la estimaba porque, pues, para empezar, el papel de un monarca es mantener la unidad de su estado y nación, que representa todos los buenos valores de su sociedad. Así de relajante era su papel. Mantiene una unidad política. Y en el caso británico también mantenía la seguridad y estabilidad. Mantenía la estabilidad. Le daba una sensación de seguridad mediante la estabilidad y continuidad. Y la reina Isabel II tenía funciones súper complejas, porque tenía todas las funciones de una jefa de Estado. Acá el papel de jefe de Estado no solo debe tomar posturas, es un papel muy complejo el que cumplió la reina Isabel II. Por eso es una figura importante allá en el Reino Unido, y no solo en el Reino Unido, no, de impacto mundial.
The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, so presumably she must have died before.
Lo que está reiterando el conductor de la BBC es que la reina Isabel II falleció en casa acompañada de su familia en tranquilidad allá en Escocia. Ella se encontraba en su residencia en Escocia. Estas imágenes no son de Escocia, son del Palacio de Buckingham. Las cámaras ahora están ahí, reunidas con la gente, esperando lo que pasa.
Had travelled across to Balmoral Castle, so one presumes that they will have been there at the end. And the Princess Royal as well, one must assume, though they have not said that. And of course there will be many arrangements, but before the arrangements there will be all the tributes. And those will be on a scale that we have really not seen before.
No. They've started, Nick, already, as you can imagine. President Biden, the White House, he and his wife saying our hearts and thoughts go to the Queen's family and the British people, of course, coming from our strongest ally. So you'd expect the statement to be warm and sincere, as it is. But as you say, Nick, it'll be just the start of countless tributes from world leaders, religious leaders, and of course, I think it's right to say this, from millions of people, from ordinary people who will want to be sharing their sense of loss.
Yes, and that sense of loss will be deep and it will be widespread. As we've both been saying, people will feel a personal loss, that a person who they in some way knew or felt they knew has gone, who was always there, who was this reassuring presence, this embodiment of stability and continuity, and who personified.
Lo mismo que les acabamos de comentar es lo que está reafirmando el conductor de la BBC, el rol de la reina en la sociedad británica, que justamente habla de que les da una sensación de seguridad, de unidad. Les da una sensación de seguridad, de unidad y, por supuesto, de continuidad.
huge statement that the new Prime Minister made in the House of Commons today about
Los dejamos con las imágenes.
war in Europe. Well, the monarchy, in one of those hard to put your finger on ways, is a stabilizing and unifying force, and that will be the challenge now for Charles as king, and he, I'm sure, will want to act quickly. He will lead the mourning for his mother, for the Queen, but he will, I'm sure, also want to just indicate that he understands what is required as a constitutional monarch. He has already indicated that he does completely understand that it is a different role, that he will have to give up his interventions, but I think that he will reign in a slightly different way. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but each monarch brings something of their own personality to the role, and I think that Charles will try to continue his interest in some of those issues without in any way allowing politics or a political scope to come into it.
I'm told, Nick, that we are expecting a statement from the new king fairly shortly. So when we have that, we'll bring it right away. And as we look at these rather nice images of Her Majesty, of course, engaged in one of the endless official engagements that she's done over the years, it's worth bringing in as well some remarks from the Dutch royal family.
Perdonen, ustedes están indicando que están esperando la pronunciación del rey, del nuevo rey.
The Dutch royal family saying, "We remember Queen Elizabeth II with deep
El
respect."
de la BBC está diciendo que recuerdan a la reina Isabel con mucho respeto.
She dedicated her long
Ella dedicó una larga parte de su vida para servir a los británicos.
The Netherlands. We feel a strong bond with the United Kingdom and its royal family. And we share their
Es una carta que les llega que dice que tienen lazos fuertes con el Reino Unido y su familia.
friendship
Se sienten agradecidos por su gran amistad
an unforgettable contribution.
y por sus contribuciones inolvidables.
And Queen Maxima and
Hablan del rey Alexander
of the Netherlands offering their tributes. Just worth underlining the scale and the importance and the impact of what we are reporting today. It is a huge milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. The fact that the Queen, who was crowned back in 1953, has died peacefully at Balmoral in Scotland this afternoon. The King, that is King Charles, and the Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral this evening.
Buckingham Palace announced the
And
death
then
of Her Majesty
we will
Queen
be
Elizabeth
expecting
II.
them to return
The Palace
to London
has just issued
tomorrow.
this statement.
And that's a
Says the Queen
statement
died peacefully
also
at
expected
Balmoral
from
this afternoon.
the new King.
The King and
Sometime
the Queen
in the
Consort
next
will
maybe
remain at
20
Balmoral
minutes or
this
so,
evening.
but these
and
images
will-
Lo
remind
que
us
estamos viendo hace unos instantes es la piscina de Reuters.
In the past few
La
minutes,
piscina de video están repitiendo unos fragmentos de BBC World News en limpio para que los demás medios de comunicación se puedan sumar.
Coronation Day back in 1953, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother,
Mientras tanto, la BBC
inside.
sigue recordando la trayectoria de la reina. Lo que están diciendo, están reflexionando sobre su papel, su importancia en el Reino Unido. Están recopilando las reacciones.
The huge crowd that had gathered on Coronation Day back in 1953. Well, we're looking at the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. And here we are in 2022 reporting on the Queen's death at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace formally making that announcement a short while ago, saying that the Queen, whose health was the matter of a bulletin earlier today, and doctors expressing their concern, Queen died peacefully at Balmoral during the course of this evening. We don't have a precise time, but we do know that several members of the royal family
Está reafirmando la información de la muerte. Está diciendo que no hay una hora precisa de cuándo ocurrió, pero se produjo la muerte alrededor de su familia.
and indeed the news came fairly soon after their arrival that Her Majesty had indeed passed away at the age of 96. Earlier today,
Está hablando sobre
they
el
were
equipo
saying that she
médico
was
que fue
being
de hecho a
kept
visitarla y que poco después de que salieron
in
fue que
Balmoral.
confirmaron
There
su
was no
deceso
sign of any
hoy.
move to hospital, no sign of any further intervention by
Esto se
doctors in a
produce
different
obviamente
kind of
después de la
facility.
notificación de que su
All
salud
the care
estaba
was being done
era delicada.
at Balmoral itself, and indeed a few hours later
Está describiendo las últimas horas de la monarca que les pasó allá en su residencia en Escocia.
that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, having lost her husband, Prince Philip, back in 2021.
Están hablando que ella ya había
And
perdido
on the Queen's
al
death,
presidente Philip en
We
2021.
now have a new king. Prince Charles
El
will
príncipe
become
Charles
King
se va a
Charles,
volver rey,
possibly, with
posiblemente.
a consort who will be the Queen consort, known as Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall.
Están hablando de la duquesa. Hablando de una duquesa, están hablando de la sucesión.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth
Reafirma la
II,
noticia el
the
Palacio de
longest
Buckingham
serving
ha
monarch in the history of the
anunciado la
United
muerte
Kingdom,
de Isabel II,
and
la
the
monarca
commanding
más
presence
longeva del
in
Reino
British
Unido.
public life for more than 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in
Dice que murió en
Aberdeenshire
Balmoral
today at the age of
hoy
96.
a la edad de 96
Queen's
años.
eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become king. And within the past few
Su
minutes,
hijo más joven
Buckingham Palace
se ha
released
convertido,
this
su hijo
formal
mayor,
statement.
sí, perdón, se ha
The Queen
convertido en el
died
nuevo rey.
peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
Este es el
King,
comunicado
the Queen
oficial del
Consort,
Palacio de
will remain
Buckingham.
at Balmoral
La reina
this
murió
evening
pacíficamente
and
en
will
Balmoral
return
esta
to
tarde.
London
El rey y la
tomorrow.
reina consort van a quedarse en Balmoral esta tarde y regresar a
We're
London
expecting
en Londres
a
el día de
statement
mañana.
from the new king fairly shortly. We're also
Vamos a
expecting
tener una
a statement
declaración
from
del
the new
nuevo
Prime
rey del
Minister,
Reino
Liz
Unido
Truss,
en breve.
who visited the Queen in Balmoral just a couple of days ago, and was able to accept the invitation to form a government in that audience, where the Queen was seen to be smiling broadly and looked very focused on the task at hand, albeit looking rather frail. Well, that was 2 days ago, and yesterday came the news that she was unable to
Para las
fulfill
personas
an
que se acaban de
appointment
sumar a nuestra
with the
transmisión,
Privy
estamos
Council.
conectados
That's
a la
the
BBC,
senior ministers
estamos
in
conectados
the
también
new government of
a
Liz
Reuters.
Truss.
Estamos esperando la
It is
declaración del
an
nuevo rey del
online
Reino
meeting,
Unido.
but
El día de
nonetheless,
hoy la reina
the
Isabel
Queen was judged
II
to be too tired,
falleció a
and,
los 96 años de edad,
she
murió
wasn't well,
pacíficamente en
as
su
the doctor
casa
suggested
en
last
Balmoral, en
evening,
Escocia,
that,
rodeada de
that
su
meeting
familia.
should not be
El
held,
comunicado lo dio
and she
hoy
was resting
el
last
Palacio
night.
de Buckingham.
And
Estamos
by this morning,
esperando a
indeed,
que el nuevo rey,
late
es decir,
morning,
en la sucesión de
Queen's
monarcas de
doctors
allá
were
del Reino
clearly
Unido,
very concerned
hay un nuevo rey
Queen's
en
condition had
automático. Estamos
deteriorated
esperando su
very
pronunciación.
rapidly.
Mientras tanto, la
And then by
televisión
lunchtime we
británica,
had
la
a
televisión
statement
oficial británica
that
está
health was causing
recogiendo
particular
reacciones,
concern.
está reflexionando sobre
And
el
we
rol
saw
de la
the
monarca
members
en
of
la
the
historia, en la
family arriving in
sociedad
Balmoral.
política y,
Shortly
sí, y
after
ánimo
that,
y moral del Reino
within the
Unido,
past
porque
half hour or so,
la reina Isabel II
came
era
the
muy
formal
importante
statement
en la vida de los,
that
de los, de los
Queen Elizabeth
habitantes del Reino Unido.
II has died at the age of 96. We have statements from lots of world leaders. We'll come to them in a second. The President of the Irish Republic, for example, Michael D. Higgins. The Queen visited the Irish Republic back in
Está leyendo
2011.
una
She was the
declaración
first British monarch to
del
visit
primer
the
ministro
Irish
de,
Republic. It was a hugely successful
Irlanda.
meeting. I've got a very warm welcome there. Her Majesty, says President Higgins, served the British people with exceptional dignity. Her personal commitment to her role and
Está diciendo que sirvió al
extraordinary
pueblo de Reino
sensitivity
Unido
were the hallmarks
con una
of
gran
her
dignidad,
period as Queen, which will hold a unique place in
el
British
cual va a
history.
guardar
There aren't many
un lugar muy
who will
especial en la
disagree
historia
with
del
that.
Reino Unido.
That's President Michael Higgins of the
El
Republic of
presidente
Ireland.
Michael
The
Higgins
Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has just issued this statement, which of course will be welcomed by Charles as the new king as well. He says, "May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace and rise
Estamos
in glory."
escuchando
Justin Welby, the
reacciones del
Archbishop
mundo
of
de otros
Canterbury.
mandatarios.
As she had
Hay
done
personas
before,
muy allegadas a la
she
reina Isabel
reminded
II
us
que
of a
lamentan
deep
su
truth
fallecimiento.
about ourselves, says the Archbishop. We are a people of hope who care for one another.
Somos gente de
very
esperanza que se
warm
preocupa uno por el
tribute
otro.
and a sincere tribute from the Archbishop himself. I think we can bring a little more from the Archbishop, and it's a very eloquent tribute, as you'd imagine, from Justin Welby. It's with profound sadness, says the Archbishop, that I join the nation, the Commonwealth, and the world.
Creo que
in
está
mourning
hablando
the
el
death of her
arzobispado
late
local,
Majesty, the Queen.
donde lamentan la
My prayers
muerte
are
de
with
la,
the King
de la,
and
de,
with the
de
royal
la
family.
reina.
May God draw near them and comfort them in the days and weeks and months ahead. The Archbishop goes on, as we grieve together, we know that in losing our beloved Queen, we have lost the person who
Sabemos que en la
steadfast
pérdida de
loyalty,
nuestra querida
service
reina
and
hemos
humility
perdido una
has
persona
helped
que
us make sense of who we are through decades of extraordinary change in our world, our nation and society. And as deep as our grief runs, even deeper is our gratitude for Her late Majesty's extraordinary dedication to the United Kingdom, her realms and the Commonwealth. Through times of war and hardship, says the
a través de los
Archbishop,
tiempos de
through
guerra
seasons of
y de tiempos
upheaval and
duros,
change, and through moments of joy and celebration,
así como momentos de alegría y de celebración,
by Her
hemos,
late Majesty's faith in
hemos
what
sido sostenidos
and who
por la fe
we
de
are
su
called
majestad.
to be. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, with that.
Sí, es el arzobispado de Canterbury, Justin Willow, quien se pronuncia, lamenta y se pronuncia sobre la muerte de la reina Isabel
From
II.
Charles, who became king on the death of his mother.
El rey Charles dijo esto:
We mourn profoundly the passing of a
lamentamos
cherished
mucho
sovereign
la muerte
and a much-loved
de una
mother.
soberana muy alegre y
I
de
know
una
her
muy
loss will
querida
be
madre.
deeply felt throughout the
Yo sé que
country,
la pérdida
the
será
realms,
profundamente
and the
sentida a
Commonwealth,
través del
and
país,
by countless people
around
the world.
el Commonwealth
The
y
tribute
alrededores,
by
por mucha gente
the new
alrededor del mundo.
by
El
Charles,
tributo
who became king immediately on his
y el mundo le rendía
mother's
tributo. Es lo que el nuevo rey Charles
So the tone, as one would expect,
dijo
is
inmediatamente.
loving,
El
it's
tono que uno
warm,
podría esperar
it's
es amoroso, es cálido, es
and
respetuoso
it just
y
underlines
solamente es
the affection in which the Queen was held. We are expecting the Prime Minister.
abrumador el afecto de que la reina estaba rodeada.
Was moving, wasn't it?
Estamos esperando al primer ministro solo en un instante que se va a pronunciar. Esta es
Interesting that it's not signed as King Charles. There's no name on it. It has been suggested that he might take another name as king, but I suspect it'll be tomorrow before we learn that. But yes, it's quite hard to sum up.
Esta es la oficina del primer ministro, de la primer ministro, perdón. El número 10 de la Downing Street, de la calle Downing. Estamos esperando a que se pronuncie la primer ministra del Reino Unido sobre la muerte de Isabel
But Charles
II.
must now begin to assert himself and begin his reign. I'm sure he will travel around the country. He will. I mean, this is challenging. It would be challenging for anybody, and we're about clearly to hear.
Ahí está saliendo la primer ministra del Reino Unido. Vamos a escuchar.
We are all devastated.
Todos estamos devastados por la noticia que solo acabamos de tener de Balmoral. La muerte de Su Majestad la Reina es un gran impacto para la nación y el mundo. La Reina Isabel II fue una roca en la que la Gran Bretaña moderna fue construida. Todo el país ha crecido y florecido bajo su reino. Gran Bretaña es Reino Unido es el país que ascendió. Ella desarrolló el bien común. Sus familias 6 naciones llegando a cada continente del mundo. La Reina Isabel II nos dio estabilidad y fuerza que necesitamos. Ella era un gran espíritu del Reino Unido. Ella ha sido la monarca más longeva en Reino. Es un logro extraordinario probado
Her
con dignidad.
life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United
Más allá de
Kingdom
la fuerza,
and all around the
todas sus
world.
memorias van a...
She has been a
Ella
personal
fue amada y
inspiration to
admirada
me
por la gente en el Reino
and
Unido
to
y por
many
todo el mundo.
Britons.
Ella
Her
fue
devotion to
inspiración
duty
personal
is an
hacia
example
mí,
to
dice
us
la
all.
primera ministra, y para muchas
Earlier this
personas
week, at
que tenían
96,
devoción a Gran
she
Bretaña. Es un
remained
ejemplo
determined to
del
carry out her
carácter.
duties, as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister.
Ella estaba
Throughout her
determinada
life, she's
en
been
llevar
to
sus
more than 100
deberes, así
countries,
como
and she has touched the
ella
lives
me
of millions around
concedió
the
el
world.
ser la 15ª
In the
primer
difficult
ministra.
days ahead, we will come
En
together
100
with our
países ha tocado
friends
millones de vidas
across the
alrededor del
United
mundo.
Kingdom,
Los días,
the Commonwealth
los días difíciles que se acercan
celebrate
los vamos a
her
enfrentar
extraordinary
juntos
lifetime
alrededor
of
del Reino Unido.
service.
El bien común
It is a
se va a
day
llevar
of
para
great
celebrar
loss.
su extraordinario
Queen
tiempo de vida de
Elizabeth II
servicio.
leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes
Habla
as it
sobre
has
la
done
pérdida de
for
Elizabeth
more than
II, que va a
1,000
dejar un gran
years,
legado.
to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family,
Está hablando sobre
we mourn the loss
su
of
nueva
his mother.
majestad, el
And as
rey
we
Charles,
mourn, we
quien va a
must come
suceder a
together
la
as a
familia.
people to support him,
Lamentamos la pérdida de la
to help
madre,
him bear the awesome responsibility
y
that
debemos
he now
unirnos
carries
como
for
personas
us all.
para apoyarlo,
We offer him
por
our
la
loyalty
increíble
and
responsabilidad
devotion,
que ahora sabemos que
just
va a
as his
llevar
mother
con él en su
devoted so
alma.
much to so many for
Va,
so long.
que su alma va a llenar
And with the
con
passing
devoción y
of the
lealtad,
second Elizabeth
así como su madre
we
tuvo
usher
devoción
in a new
por mucho
era
tiempo.
in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words,
Viene una nueva era para el
God
Reino
save
Unido,
the
así
King.
como su majestad lo hubiese deseado. Dios salve al
Prime
rey.
Minister
Esa
Liz
fue
Truss, who
la
was
primer
installed
ministra
down
Liz
just
Truss,
a couple of days ago, having
quien se
met the
acaba
Queen
de
in
pronunciar
last 4
respecto a la
years.
muerte de Isabel II.
Really
Está
presenting
lamentaron la muerte de la monarca, enfatizó sobre su importancia hacia el mundo, su contribución a las personas del Reino Unido y al mundo. Llama por supuesto a apoyar al nuevo reinado del rey Charles para continuar con la maravillosa tarea que hizo Elizabeth II, en honor también para mantener la unidad. Fíjense, habla de mantener la unidad y esto en honor a la gran trayectoria y tiempo de vida, a la vida que tuvo Isabel II. Este fue el pronunciamiento de Liz Truss, primera ministra del Reino Unido, sobre la muerte de la reina Isabel II, que por supuesto ella declaró también que fue una inspiración para ella, así como la anotó hace 2 semanas para ser primera ministra del Reino Unido.
William IV, who became king in 1830, aged 64. Well, Charles is 73.
Están hablando de que el nuevo rey, el rey Charles del Reino Unido, tiene 76 años. Es un desafío para cualquiera, dice el conductor, y sí, también la primera ministra enfatizaba que el pueblo tiene que darle su apoyo al rey Charles para que puedan continuar con el legado que dejó Isabel II respecto a cómo dejó el Reino Unido en cuestión de unidad y de moral, sobre todo también de gestión.
Assured people that he will not meddle, which is the one great concern that people have had about him. It was the one area.
Para las personas que se acaban de sumar, estamos en directo viendo la señal de la BBC. Estamos recopilando más información sobre lo que pasará en las próximas horas, en los próximos minutos. Falleció la reina Isabel II. Están escuchando ustedes la señal de la BBC de los 2 conductores especializados en el tema de la familia real. Han estado pronunciándose sobre qué es lo que dejó la reina, cómo es que se sintió la gente antes, durante y después de su mandato y ahora fallecimiento. Hemos escuchado a la primera ministra del Reino Unido, Liz Truss, lamentar la muerte e incentivar a la gente a que apoyen al nuevo rey Charles de 70 años, de poco más de 70 años de edad, quien va a asumir ahora la corona en el Reino Unido para darle continuidad a todo lo que ha establecido la reina Isabel II. Es muy poético cómo lo manejan, cómo lo dicen, porque se habla de una lluvia larga, de un long rain. Es decir, se refiere ellos, ellos se refieren ellos se refieren a la trayectoria de Elizabeth II, de la reina Elizabeth II, como si hubiera sido una lluvia muy larga, pero no una lluvia en el sentido despectivo. Es muy poético cómo se están refiriendo los conductores de la BBC al respecto del tiempo de vida de Elizabeth II.
During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our
Durante el periodo de esta mañana y de cambio, mi familia y yo seremos conformados, sostenidos por nuestro conocimiento, respeto y afecto en el cual la reina estaba tan apoyada. Es el ex príncipe de Gales. Ahora, el rey Charles III, porque el primer ministro ha confirmado que la reina, teniendo la edad de 96 años, ha sido sucedida por Charles el III y, por supuesto, la consorte de la reina, Camila. Vamos a ir a Downing Street, donde la primer ministra ha rendido tributo a la reina. Vamos a ver qué dice Chris Marson, es el editor político y de primer ministro de la BBC. Supongo que dice que supone que va a tener que presentar Sí, eso es correcto. La primer ministra, a los 48, tiene tareas de la oficina del primer ministro. Para un profundo momento en la historia del país, solo está recopilando uno de los enunciados del statement que dio hace unos instantes, de que sí, justamente lo que dijo, que decían que la reina era una piedra sobre la cual, una gran piedra sólida sobre la cual, fue un cimiento sobre el cual se edificó la Gran Bretaña moderna. Está esculpida en la personalidad de la primer ministro. El rey será conocido como Su Majestad el Rey Charles III. La profunda solemnidad y gravedad de esas últimas palabras, Dios salve al rey. Cuando miramos el cambio que está ocurriendo en este momento, porque claramente hay grandes implicaciones para Downing Street en el gobierno, dando que existe una relación muy fuerte entre la oficina del monarca y el parlamento ejecutivo en esta monarquía constitucional. Tenemos que tener, y lo que estará pasando, ¿qué crees en términos de administración de Downing Street? ¿Cómo estarán cambiando las cosas desde Downing Street para llegar a términos de darle lo que ahora sabemos un nuevo monarca? Será un cambio muy profundo, un cambio significativo. Es tiempo de políticamente. Es mover un equipo. Es mover un gran equipo. Justamente el primer ministro, pero también los consejeros seniors en las últimas 48 horas han estado trabajando para saber cómo el gobierno y el Estado británico van a trabajar del lado político. Y justo ahora, y no más allá, están llevando las conversaciones entre Downing Street como una institución y el Palacio de Buckingham también como una institución, pero ninguno es menos obvio de que es un momento histórico profundo y que las cosas van a cambiar. Un primer ministro hubiera llevado una simple audiencia con la reina, mientras el primer ministro se dirige a ver a la monarca.
In the political world, it being the one opportunity where you can talk very candidly to someone without the prospect of it being leaked, that in the future for the Prime Minister will be very different from the one that she might have anticipated, from the one that so many of her predecessors, 14 of her predecessors, have enjoyed, that conversation that they had with the Queen, more recently taking place remotely.
Está hablando sobre un encuentro que han tenido los 14 primeros ministros, los 14 ministros anteriores a Liz han tenido un encuentro con la reina, y
y está enfatizando que esta no va a tener un acercamiento como lo tuvieron los demás. Obviamente las cosas van a cambiar también desde ese lado político.
A stateswoman of a longevity greater than any other on earth, and with that, prime ministers would so often reflect in interviews and in their memoirs just how valuable a relationship that was.
Sí, está hablando que va a cambiar también cómo es la comunicación política respecto a ellos. Dicen, bueno, él está diciendo que los primeros ministros anteriores que tenían estos acercamientos con la reina del Reino Unido podían decirle al mundo qué relación tan increíble tenían con ella al estar dentro del Reino Unido como figura, porque al ser una monarca tan longeva tenía cierto estatus político a nivel mundial, uno muy grande, el cual ahora los futuros primeros ministros ya no podrán presumir tan fácil.
Response to what's happened today and the Queen's death. She said it was a profoundly sad moment for the UK.
Está dando un pronunciamiento desde Escocia.
And then the First Minister goes on to say the Queen's life was one of
La
extraordinary
vida de la reina era una dedicación extraordinaria y servicio.
people of Scotland.
Y en nombre de la gente de Escocia,
Condolences to the
yo
Queen.
entrego mis más profundas condolencias al rey y a la familia real. La primera ministra de Escocia. Es la declaración que ella dio hace unos minutos. Son las 7:20 y en el Reino Unido están viendo la cobertura especial de Planeta TV y la BBC en este suceso muy triste que es la muerte de la reina Isabel II. Está reiterando la noticia de que el Palacio de Buckingham anunció su muerte el día de hoy. Está reiterando que murió a la edad de 96 años en paz. Ahora están reiterando el comunicado del Palacio de Buckingham. Vamos a recapitular la información por nuestro lado. La reina Isabel II, la monarca más longeva del Reino Unido, murió en Balmoral a los 96 años después de reinar durante 70 años. Su familia se reunió en su finca escocesa después de que crecieran las preocupaciones sobre su salud el día de hoy, jueves temprano. La reina llegó al trono en 1952 y fue testigo de un enorme cambio social. Con su muerte, su hijo mayor Carlos, el ex príncipe de Gales, liderará el país en duelo como el nuevo rey y jefe de Estado para 14 reinos del bien común o de la Commonwealth. En un comunicado, el Palacio de Buckingham dijo: la reina murió pacíficamente en Balmoral esta tarde. El rey y la reina consorte permanecerán en Balmoral esta noche y regresarán a Londres mañana. Todos los hijos de la reina viajaron a Balmoral, cerca de Aberdeen, después de que los médicos pusieran a la reina bajo supervisión médica. Su nieto, el príncipe William, también está ahí, con su hermano, el príncipe Harry, en camino. El mandato de la reina Isabel II como jefa de Estado abarcó la austeridad de la posguerra, la transición del imperio a la Commonwealth o bien común, literalmente, pero se le conoce como Commonwealth, es un sustantivo. El final de la Guerra Fría y la entrada y retirada del Reino Unido de la Unión Europea. Su reinado abarcó 15 primeros ministros, comenzando con Winston Churchill, nacido en 1974, incluyendo a Liz Truss, nacida 101 años después, en 1975, y nombrada por la reina a principios de esta semana. Mantuvo audiencias semanales con su primer ministro durante todo su reinado. En el Palacio de Buckingham en Londres, las multitudes que esperaban actualizaciones sobre el estado de salud de la reina comenzaron a llorar cuando se enteraron de su muerte. La bandera de la Unión en la parte superior del palacio fue bajada a media hasta a las 18:30 horas, es decir, 6:30 horas, casi una hora allá, tiempo de Reino Unido. La reina nació como Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor en Mayfair, Londres, el 21 de abril de 1926. Pocos podrían haber previsto que se convertiría en monarca, pero en diciembre de 1936, su tío Eduardo VII abdicó el trono para casarse con el estadounidense dos veces divorciado Wallis Simpson. El padre de Isabel se convirtió en el rey Jorge VI y a los 10 años Lilibet, como era conocida la familia, se convirtió en la heredera al trono. En 3 años Gran Bretaña estaba en guerra con la Alemania nazi. Isabel y su hermana menor, la princesa Margarita, pasaron gran parte de la guerra en el castillo de Windsor, después de que sus padres rechazaron las sugerencias de que fueran evacuados a Canadá. Después de cumplir 18 años, Elizabeth pasó 5 meses con el Servicio Territorial Auxiliar y aprendió habilidades básicas de mecánica de motores y conducción. Durante la guerra intercambió cartas con su primo tercero, Felipe, príncipe de Grecia, que estaba sirviendo en la Navada Real, en la Royal Navy. Su romance floreció y la pareja se casó en la abadía de Westminster el 20 de noviembre de 1947, con el príncipe tomando el título de Duque de Edimburgo. Más tarde lo describiría como mi fuerza y mi estancia, a través de 74 años de matrimonio, antes de su muerte en 2021, a los 99 años. Isabel fue coronada en la abadía de Westminster el 2 de junio de 1953. La edad de 27 años, frente a una audiencia televisiva entonces récord estimada en más de 20 millones de personas. Las décadas posteriores verían un gran cambio con el fin del Imperio Británico en el extranjero y los oscilantes años 60 barriendo las normas sociales en casa. Esta es la ficha de Elizabeth II. Vamos a esperar el procedimiento del
She was down to earth and straightforward, and as I said, she never let it go to her head. She realized that she was there by an accident of birth and that she needed to win the trust and respect of her people, and that perhaps is something that not every member of her family has fully appreciated. Well, she did, in the same way that her father did, and in the same way I think that Charles has also appreciated that, because he has worked so hard. Prince Charles, been a few controversies and difficulties for him, but he has set out during his time as Prince of Wales to win the respect of people and to show that he is worthy of the office and the position to which he has now succeeded. There he is with.
Estamos escuchando
He is now mourning
a la BBC otra
the
vez.
loss of that mother and the loss of the Queen as he becomes king. Now we must assume that the Prime Minister Liz Truss has not, as it were, jumped the gun in naming him as King
Esto
Charles
es
III. It's not been
estas
confirmed by
imágenes
Buckingham
son
Palace.
el
We
exterior
assume that is correct.
de
As you speak, think your timing is impeccable. Clarence House has literally, in the last couple of seconds, confirmed that it is King Charles III. So, well done on prompting that.
Very good.
Very good. So it is King Charles III, that's official. And I'm just going to interrupt a second, Nick, if I may, because Boris Johnson, who of course was Prime Minister until just a few days ago, has issued this statement. It's fairly lengthy, but I'm going to just read through it because well, you'll understand why. This is our country's saddest day, says Boris Johnson. In the hearts of every one of us,
Estoy leyendo una declaración de Boris Johnson que es el día más triste del Reino Unido.
In these first grim moments since the news, I know that millions and millions of people have been pausing whatever they've been doing to think about Queen Elizabeth and about the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. These are the words of Boris Johnson. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. And Mr. Johnson says, wave after wave of grief is rolling.
Los vamos a dejar por ahora con el audio original. Si ocurre cualquier otra cosa, nos conectaremos de nuevo. Muchas gracias por ver el boletín informativo. Los dejamos con estas imágenes desde Escocia y estaremos atentos a lo que diga la BBC.
As is so natural with human beings, it is only when we face the reality of our loss that we truly understand what has gone. And it is only really now that we grasp how much she meant for us, how much she did for us, how much she loved us. Boris Johnson continues, as we think of the void that she leaves, we understand the vital role that she played, selflessly and calmly embodying the continuity and unity of our country. We think of her deep vision, her wisdom, her historic understanding, her seemingly inexhaustible but understated sense of duty.
Special program
Relentless,
supporting the
though
death
her diary must
of Her
have
Majesty,
felt,
the Queen.
she never once let it show. And to tens of thousands of events, great and small, she brought her smile and her warmth and her gentle humour. For an unrivalled 70 years, she spread that magic throughout her kingdom. And then Boris Johnson ends his tribute like this. This is our country's saddest day because she had a unique and simple power to make us happy. And that is why we loved her. That is why we grieve for Elizabeth the Great, the longest serving and in many ways the finest monarch in our history. It was one of her best achievements that she not only modernised the constitutional monarchy, but produced an heir to her throne who will amply do justice to her legacy and whose own sense of duty is in the best traditions of his mother and his country. Though our voices may still be choked with sadness, we can say with confidence the words not heard in this country for more than 7 decades. God save the King. The words of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister until a couple of days ago, and I'm bound to ask Nicholas Witchell, who's with me, that is quite a contrast to the tribute, the neat and elegant and sincere tribute that the Prime Minister paid, but that is of a different order, isn't it?
There is real feeling, isn't there? There is resonance in the words from Boris Johnson. He has clearly thought about that a great deal. Yes, she seemed so timeless, he says, and that I think is what a lot of us will be feeling at this moment. And as he rightly says, we've not heard those words for 70 years, God save the King. Well, we have to adjust and get used to the reality of that situation now, because that, sadly, as we mourn the passing of the Queen, we accept that the head of state is now the King. But yes, Boris Johnson, I think, capturing in those few hundred words what so many people, so many people will be feeling just right now.
Let's bring in our home editor, Mark Easton, because Mark, you again are in a perfect place really, given your brief, to talk a little about the change that this represents. It's been called seismic, it's been called great, it's been called fundamental. How do you read the kind of process and impact of change that the Queen's death will produce?
Well, Hugh, here at Buckingham Palace, you can see the way the public is already reacting. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people have already turned up. Applause breaking out. Just behind me now, people are pouring down the Mall, coming to pay their respects. King Charles III, as we must now learn to call him, talked about the respect and affection that the British people had for his mother. And you can feel that in the crowd here. It's a sombre atmosphere. Some people, I have to say, are close to tears. This was a very personal relationship with a woman who embodied something very special about their country. She was, I think, the keystone in the nation's architecture, the solid and immovable piece that sort of defined the nation's image of itself. And that is why I think when that keystone is removed, this is a very difficult and perhaps a dangerous moment for the United Kingdom. We've talked a lot about constancy and consistency and the solidity that she brought to this country. But I think that one shouldn't think that constancy is the same as inactivity, because this was a queen like a fish swimming, keeping sort of still in a fast-flowing stream. She remained solid and still while everything was moving around her, and that required constant adaptation and change, and she put enormous thought into how she could, what she described as, ease the process of change for her people. People are arriving here. Her subjects are arriving at Buckingham Palace. Some have brought flowers already. What's interesting, I think, about this crowd, I think it says something very important about Queen Elizabeth. This is a crowd of every generation and every background. There are a lot of young people, a lot of people from ethnic minorities. It's a very mixed crowd, and she was a queen that was able to be a figurehead for people from whatever background in Britain. As I say, we've got tens of thousands of people here already. I think this is going to become the focal point for that national grief over the next few days. And we will remember, some of us, the extraordinary scenes here after the death of Diana. And I think we will see something not dissimilar with the loss of Queen Elizabeth. This is a huge moment for the country. I think it's going to be very difficult for people to adjust. I think that as well as sadness, people are feeling unsettled. And this was already at a time when there was quite a lot of foreboding about the winter to come. So I think this is going to be quite a moment for Britain and a time for people to pull together and support each other.
Mark, thank you so much. Mark Easton with some thoughts there on what this event, what this loss means for people across the UK and indeed beyond. And as we look at these images, I have to say there are lots of very heartfelt and eloquent tributes being paid here in the UK and around the world. The former Prime Minister Sir John Major calling the Queen selfless and wise with a wonderful generosity of spirit. He said he was greatly saddened the news of her death. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair: we've lost not just our monarch but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who more than any other brought our country together and kept us in touch with our better nature and personified everything which makes us proud to be British. And Mr. Blair goes on, she was not only the respected and loved monarch, she was respected because of the qualities of duty and decency and integrity and fidelity which she embodied, and loved because of the love and affection that she bestowed on us. And we will mourn her and we will miss her. That was Tony Blair speaking earlier on. Lots of other tributes from around the world. President Macron, the French president: Her Majesty the Queen embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. And President Macron says, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted queen who's left a lasting impression on her country and her century. And then President Zelensky of Ukraine, that troubled country, sending this message: on behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire UK and the Commonwealth, over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then we have the German president too, Herr Steinmeier, saying Queen Elizabeth was a woman who shaped a century, and Her Majesty enjoyed the highest respect in the whole world. A very concise statement, but one that conveys the fundamental truth about the life and the times. Let's think about the United States. There are statements from President Trump, former President Trump, former President Obama, but I've just received this from President Biden, and this has just come in from the White House. So as we look at these images of the Queen's long life, from her coronation back in 1953 all the way to this year in 2022, President Biden says, in a world of constant change, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who've never known their country without her. And that is such a powerful theme today, as Nick and I have been discussing. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth, and the 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all around the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. And we see the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, and they too, with their mobile devices, will be aware of lots of these tributes being paid. as they gather there. And now that the formal announcement has been fixed to the main railings in front of the palace, as it is done at times of great events like this, happy events and sad events. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all round the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. Supported by her beloved Prince Philip, the Queen led always with grace, an unwavering commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. And President Biden goes on to say she endured the dangers and the deprivations of a world war alongside the British people, and rallied them during the devastation of a global pandemic to look to better days ahead. Queen Elizabeth II, this is how he concludes, was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. And as a concluding thought, he says this: in the years ahead, we in the United States look forward to continuing a close friendship with the King and the Queen Consort. Today, the thoughts and prayers of people all across the United States are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief. We send our deepest condolences to the royal family, who were not only mourning their Queen, but their dear mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. And her legacy will loom large in the pages of British history and in the story of the world. I have to say, they're very moving tributes. I haven't been able to come across a few of them yet, because I know they're just waiting there for me, from the Obamas and President Trump and other leaders. But they are moving, they are eloquent. And Nick, they really do stop you in your tracks. And they just underline the fact that, you know, the appreciation for what the Queen achieved and what she represented is truly global. It's not, you know, we tend to talk about the Commonwealth. Of course, that's important. It's beyond that.
As Boris Johnson said, it's only when you lose somebody that you really appreciate just who they were and how much you valued them. And the same words are in so many of these tributes: grace and duty and dignity and constancy. She was someone who personified simple qualities like decency and tolerance, who encouraged politicians to be the best that they could be, who encouraged all of us really to be the best of ourselves, because she did embody those old-fashioned concepts, and she did that for decade after decade. And she was that most important thing for a monarch. She was someone who unified people. She brought people together. And the challenge for Charles now will be to continue to seek to do the same, particularly at this moment when there are pressures within the United Kingdom against unity. And so Charles, I think, will be very much aware of the challenges that he faces and the task that he must now begin.
Well, Charles's younger son, Harry, is, we understand, arriving at Balmoral just about now. I think we're expecting the arrival in a few minutes. Here we are, the entrance to the Balmoral estate, but the Duke of Sussex, who's travelling alone, we believe, because his wife Meghan is not accompanying him, but he's arriving. He didn't come with the main royal party earlier, with the Duke of Cambridge, his brother, and with Prince Andrew and with Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. He wasn't with that group. They flew up to Aberdeen quite a few hours ago, and they've been in Balmoral since then. They joined the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, who were already there at the Queen's side. So Prince Harry's arrival is considerably later than that, and indeed it's quite a while after the official announcement of the Queen's death at the age of 96. But we understand that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way there, and he's about to arrive at Balmoral at this time, where he will join the other members of the royal family. And as we've already heard, the King Charles III and the Queen Consort they will be staying at Balmoral tonight. They're not returning to London tonight. We had that statement earlier from the King. And they will be returning to London tomorrow. We've also heard from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who paid her tribute to the Queen and thanked her for a lifetime of service, and reflected indeed the great sense of national sadness at the news that came today, because although the Queen was 96 and had health problems, these images will tell you everything about recent years where, of course, she's really just done her best to carry on despite advancing years and health problems. And she and Prince Philip, who left us 2 years ago, were full of the joys during those Jubilee celebrations. And now we have some of the tributes already arriving. And they'll be arriving, of course, at Balmoral. They'll be arriving at Buckingham Palace. They'll be arriving at Windsor. So these will be local people who are used to the royal presence in Balmoral. They are very used to seeing the royal family around in these summer months. They know full well how fond the Queen was of Balmoral as a home and as a base. And they will be wanting to pay their respects as locals who tended to leave the royal family alone because they were used to seeing them around. And the Queen certainly felt very much at home there, having spent so many years there with her family and indeed with her parents when she was growing up. So sometime along this road we're expecting Prince Harry to arrive. It's going to be in probably one of those vehicles that we saw earlier, maybe a Range Rover or something of that kind, but they're still expecting his arrival there. And he will, of course, join the rest of the family, and they will no doubt be reflecting on the loss that they've suffered. They'll be sharing the sense of grief, and they'll be thinking as well about what the future holds with the new king, King Charles III. As Clarence House has confirmed, he wishes to be known King Charles III, who will be reigning with his Queen Consort Camilla, and thoughts already will be turning respectfully, sensibly but respectfully, towards the events of the next few days, leading of course to the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth, which will take place in probably 10 days' time, but we need to have that confirmed. The plans, of course, have been there for a long time. They always are. They've been revised over the years because that's how these things work. But they will need to be finalised given these circumstances because, of course, the Queen has passed away at Balmoral in Scotland and not at Windsor, not at Buckingham Palace. So the arrangements will inevitably be adjusted in the next few days in the lead up to the state funeral itself. So there'll be some talk about that, and it's fine for us to talk a little bit about that, but what we're really doing today is reflecting on people's sense of loss and what's happened today, and the fact that British life has changed, the fact that the course of our history has changed, and that is symbolised by Buckingham Palace and that empty balcony tonight where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions, on so many happy occasions indeed, during Jubilees and the end of the Second World War with her beloved father and mother and sister Margaret. So it's been the scene of so many great national events when the crowds congregate around that palace to declare their support for the royal family or indeed to express their sympathy in bad times. And the crowds are now building up. The news, which came a short while ago, clearly filtering through, and lots of people now wanting to just stand at the palace, look at the palace, want to be seen at the palace to express their sense of loss and to express their sense of sympathy with the royal family, with King Charles on the loss of his mother, and of course with the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, who've also lost a mother, and the Duke of Cambridge, who's lost his grandmother, as has the Duke of Sussex, who's on his way to Balmoral. of course a grandmother and a great-grandmother too. So there's generations of the royal family affected by the news today. That's before you start thinking about friends of the royal family and about generations of people in the UK who've known nothing else. You'd have to be in your 80s, basically, to be in any position to say that you could perhaps remember a time when the Queen wasn't sovereign, wasn't the monarch. And here we have dusk in London and the Queen Victoria Memorial glinting in the evening light, with the crowds gathering around that memorial and congregating at the gates and the railings of Buckingham Palace. The palace, which is, of course, the symbol of the royal family in central London, but is not the usual residence of the royal family. That is Windsor Castle, which is usually a short ride away in a helicopter or indeed a car. And the Queen used to be very familiar with that journey, being ferried back and forth from Windsor to Buckingham Palace for the business of the day. And then, of course, Buckingham Palace, the great backdrop for so many of the huge ceremonial and state events that we are familiar with. And they include the Queen's Birthday Parade, which will become the King's Birthday Parade when that next happens, and that famous processional route along the Mall all the way to Horse Guards Parade with the Queen until the mid-1980s was on horseback. She loved the horses, of course, as we know, not just riding, but also the horse racing, on that processional route for so many birthday parades, and indeed was in a position to enjoy the end of the parade in 2022 for the Platinum Jubilee. So many happy memories, and the crowds gathering are aware of them, but on a day when they're reflecting on a huge loss in our national life, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, who's died at the age of 96. I'm in a position to tell you what the leader of the opposition has been saying. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has issued his own statement in the past half hour or so. We mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign, says Sir Keir. It's a deep private loss for the royal family, and all our thoughts are with them at this time, and the nation shares in their grief. We will always treasure Queen Elizabeth II's life of service and devotion to our nation and the Commonwealth. Our longest serving and our greatest monarch, says Sir Keir. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon. As Britain changed rapidly around her, this dedication became the still point of our turning world. So as our great Elizabethan era comes to an end, we will honour the late Queen's memory by keeping alive the values of public service that she embodied. For 70 years, Sir Keir Starmer says, Queen Elizabeth II stood as the head of our country. But in spirit, she stood amongst us. Yet another moving tribute from our leaders there, one from Boris Johnson earlier and Liz Truss, and this one from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. There are others too, of course, from President Biden, President Obama, former President Trump, President Macron. All of these tributes coming in, all of them worth reading. They will no doubt be on the BBC News website for you to see, to just keep up with the tributes being paid, because they are moving, they're eloquent, and they are thoughtful. And it's well worth you having a look if you have a moment to do that. Now, you're watching BBC News, and this extended coverage continues this evening on the 8th of September 2022, because Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, the commanding presence in British public life for a span of 8 decades. The flags have been lowered at Buckingham Palace. The Queen died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has formally become King Charles III. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Charles, the new King, said this: "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." It's coming up to 8 o'clock in the evening. The lights are on in central London. The flags have been lowered. The crowds are gathering around the memorial by Buckingham Palace. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, still with me. And up at Balmoral, we are in a position to say that Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is either just about to arrive or has just arrived. He's certainly within minutes of arriving at Balmoral Castle itself. Some of the vehicles now pulling up, and they are the advanced vehicles, and there's the vehicle, the cavalcade, moving its way into Balmoral Castle itself, and we believe that is Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. And Nick, you're watching this with me, and that means that Harry has now joined his brother
Yes.
and his father and other members of the family.
Yes, as autumn descends on this bleak September day, there at Balmoral and also at Buckingham Palace, how striking are those images outside the palace, people feeling the need to come together at this moment in the nation's history, the day on which the Queen of the last 70 years has passed away. People need, I think, just the solace, the comfort of being with other people. The nation will begin its mourning, bells will be rung and guns will be sounded and church services will come together. I remember the words that were used, I think, by a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, who talked about service untiringly done, duty faithfully fulfilled. Everyone will have their words about the reign, the duty of Elizabeth II, as we all just pay our tributes now to a life of duty, of humility, of decency, as the process, the transition now to this new reign gets underway. And I expect we will hear from the new king tomorrow. There will also, of course, be an accession council when the Privy Council comes together. Not the full Privy Council, because there simply isn't room these days, but they will come together and they will confirm the succession, and they will, I imagine, at some point hear from the new king. And those statements by him will be important to set the tone for his reign, paying tribute to his mother on behalf of his family and the nation, but also setting out his aspirations, his wish, his ambition to be a force for unity and continuity and stability at a time when stability perhaps is in rather shorter supply than it has been at many other times. It is unsettling, as Mark Easton said. It is disorientating, and many people will feel that, and they will need to be reassured at this moment.
Nick, thanks again. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, with some thoughts there on the significance of today and the loss that people have suffered today and the country has suffered, and the fact that we no longer have a queen. We have a king, King Charles III, who has acceded to the throne immediately, the moment that his mother passed away. Lots of tributes which we can still share with you from political leaders, from religious leaders. For example, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who saw the Queen so many times, of course, during her period as Prime Minister, simply said this: "I want to place on record," says Theresa May, "that Her Majesty devoted herself unreservedly to a life of service. And that really does echo what so many others have been saying. It's interesting as well that the Duke of Cambridge, a new title, the Duke of Cambridge, the Duchess of Cambridge, William and Kate, of course, now being referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. So we'll see lots of these adjustments as the evening goes on. And here on BBC News, we will, of course, be bringing you more tributes from around the world and reflecting what people in communities across the United Kingdom are saying tonight after the death of the Queen. We'll take a pause for now. We'll be back for an extended edition of BBC News at 10, but we're going to join my colleague Clive Myrie now for more special coverage following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Goodbye for now.
The longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II, has died at the age of 96.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. God help me to make good my vow.
Over the course of 8 momentous decades, she witnessed social and economic change on a global scale. As Princess Elizabeth of York, she came to the throne at the age of 25, following the sudden death of her father, King George VI. During her lifelong reign, the Queen dealt with no fewer than 15 prime ministers. The first, Sir Winston Churchill, through to Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair and Boris Johnson. As head of the Commonwealth, she became the most travelled monarch in history, head of state of 15 countries at the end of her reign. The Queen's death comes just over a year after the passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, her consort for more than 70 years. Over the decades, the Queen was greeted by millions of people worldwide and met her subjects on thousands of engagements in the UK and well beyond. She was last pictured at Balmoral on Tuesday, asking Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, as the crown passes to a new king, Charles III, the Queen's death will be deeply felt by her family, by people across the United Kingdom and millions around the world. Good evening. The reign of the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom has come to an end with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace made the announcement just after 6:30 this evening. The Queen, who was 96, passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Members of the royal family had made the journey there on the news she was gravely ill. The Queen had been a commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades, and her eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become King Charles III. Buckingham Palace had issued this statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, in the last hour, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. Well, joining me now is Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent. Nick, I am 58 years of age. I've known no other monarch. And there are millions of people, we'll show the pictures a little bit later on, millions of people around the country, thousands outside Buckingham Palace, some outside Balmoral as well. They have known no other monarch either. This is a moment of profound change as well as profound sadness.
It is. It's a massive moment for the country, and I think people are just taking it in, absorbing it, and I would imagine that many millions of people are very emotional about this. The tears will flow in many households tonight as they just take in the news that this figure who has been there throughout most of our lives, in the background to our lives. I'm nearly 70 and I too have only ever known Elizabeth II on the throne. But the transition will take place. We have a new king. The crown passes imperceptibly, invisibly, immediately. He doesn't have to be sworn in. There doesn't have to be any ceremony to ensure that he is the new monarch. He is, as soon as one monarch dies, the crown passes. There will be challenges for him, there is no doubt. Anyone succeeding to such a huge figure who has occupied the throne for so long would face quite a challenging time to take up and pick up the threads of the constitutional monarchy in this country. But I think that this nation is, at its heart, feels very comfortable with the monarchy. Not everybody does. There are many people, of course, who don't, but the overwhelming majority do. And I think that Charles will rely on those instincts and the efforts that he will make in coming days to reassure people that he will reign in the style of his mother. There will be some differences because each monarch has an element of their own personality. He will be, I think, slightly more proactive than she was. But that's all for the future, really. Tonight, millions of people in this country and around the world will be reflecting back and feeling a deep and profound sadness, will be just appreciating what it is that has been lost to the United Kingdom. The monarch who has been so dutiful, who has embodied all the best of qualities of tolerance and decency, who has stood for unity and constancy and continuity. That reign has ended. And it is a moment of great sadness and solemnity for the United Kingdom.
For the United Kingdom and indeed her own family. Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our Scotland editor, James Cook, who is at Balmoral for us now. James, what can we say, really? Members of the family are there, and by Her Majesty's bedside when she passed away, we assume. Are all the immediate members of the family now with you?
Yes, the senior royals have all arrived here. Within the past half an hour or so, the sun, shrouded in cloud, set here on the Balmoral estate, setting too on the end of an era for the United Kingdom and for the world. And minutes after it did so, a car swept through the gate, several cars in fact, one of them we believe containing Prince Harry, to join his brother, Prince William, and his father, the King, in mourning for Queen Elizabeth, a monarch who has a special place in the heart of this nation, but who in return had, in her own words, a deep and abiding affection for Scotland. A moment, of course, here, behind these gates, for a family, first and foremost, to mourn, but a moment too for a nation to reflect on an extraordinary reign and on the end, the severing of links with the Second World War, the existential threat to this country which this nation survived, and also to the British Empire, which in many ways the Queen embodied for some of her reign. She also, I think it is fair to say, embodied the union of the crowns between Scotland and England, that union dating all the way back to 1603.
James, thank you. Our Scotland editor there live at Balmoral. We can go now to Mark Easton, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us. Now, Mark, we were seeing a little bit earlier some of the pictures of the crowds gathered where you are, many of them having been there in the rain throughout much of the day on the news that the Queen was gravely ill, and now many more people have turned up on the news that she has now passed away.
Yes, absolutely, Clive. People are seeking some way of connecting with this extraordinary moment in British history, and despite the rain, which is really quite heavy now, there are tens of thousands of people outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been growing over the last few hours, people streaming down the Mall. In the Mall as well, we've got a line of black taxi cabs, the cabbies wanting to pay their tribute. It's a very respectful, very sombre scene. You'll see quite a few camera lights are on, but I've also heard applause, and even at one point 3 cheers. Now, we don't know whether those were moments where the crowd wanted to show their appreciation for the Queen that they have lost, or whether they were perhaps greeting their new king, King Charles III. But whichever, it is a crowd which wants to be part of this moment. And it is a huge moment, I think, Clive, for this country, because the Queen was this solid, immovable piece of the nation's architecture, the keystone. And without that, there will be a sense, I think, of unease, of uncertainty. And it is in a moment when people will want to come together, will want to be with others, to share this moment and to see it through.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there at Buckingham Palace this evening, where crowds have gathered and have been gathering throughout the day. If you are just joining us, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and a commanding presence, of course, in British public life over 8 decades. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, and she was aged 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. Our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, now looks back on today's events.
Tuesday, the 6th of September, the last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen, as tributes began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen, above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development, before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospital